Imagine the most formidable enemy you can think of.
Hmm.
Like a completely hostile force armed to the teeth. They hold every strategic advantage. They have all the resources, and they are marching directly toward you.
Sounds terrifying.
Right. But now imagine that force being utterly defeated. And not because you fired a single arrow or, because you possessed some brilliant military strategy.
Huh.
They are defeated simply because the enemy started to retreat. The sheer momentum of their own backward footsteps becomes the actual mechanism of their destruction.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, they trip over their own panic. They fall into the traps that set. Their attempt to flee is the very thing that finalizes their ruin.
That is such a bizarre, paradoxical concept.
It really is. That self-defeating opposition is where we are heading today. Welcome to Reformed Thinking. You are stepping into a dedicated space for focused, rigorous thought. Today we are taking a deep dive into the historical and theological insights of Matthew Henry.
Specifically, looking at his massive, comprehensive commentary on Psalm 9.
Yes. We have a huge stack of notes based on his analysis of this ancient text. It focuses on King David praising God for justice, victory, and sovereign authority over all nations.
And our mission for this deep dive is to unpack the most arresting insights from that commentary. We want to look at divine justice, the harsh realities of human nature, and how this ancient song points forward to the Messiah's kingdom.
We are going to look at the terrifying orderliness of divine judgment, the boomerang effect of human malice, and the psychology of trust.
Right. Specifically, how possessing data about someone's name dictates the level of confidence you place in them.
But before we get into all that, we should set the stage.
Yeah, the framework of this commentary is crucial for our understanding of the entire text. We have to read this through a lens that acknowledges humanity's total lack of inherent merit before a holy God.
Right. The baseline assumption here is that human beings bring absolutely nothing to the table.
Nothing at all. Our natural state is one of complete spiritual bankruptcy. So divine mercy is not just an accessory. It is not some helpful little boost.
It's an absolute necessity for survival.
Yes. And furthermore, the analysis anchors itself in the immutable counsel of God's providence. Every single victory, every judgment, every retreating enemy, all of it is held firmly within the unchangeable will of the Creator.
So we are not looking at a universe spinning out of control.
No, not at all.
Yeah.
We are not looking at a divine reactor who is just scrambling to respond to human free will. We are looking at a highly ordered reality where divine justice is meticulously administered.
That sets a really clear baseline for us. But before we get into those heavier themes of justice and judgment, we have to start where David starts.
Which is an interesting place.
It is. The text opens with a highly unusual musical instruction and a very specific attitude of the heart. The title of the psalm includes this weird phrase, "To the chief musician upon Muth-labben."
Muth-labben, yeah.
It sounds like a secret code or maybe a lost dialect. You read it today and it feels completely disconnected from the actual theological content of the song.
It does sound mysterious, and historians have debated its meaning for centuries, trying to figure it out. The commentary provides some of the historical speculation surrounding that specific phrase.
What kind of speculation?
Well, some scholars thought Muth-labben referred to the death of Goliath.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, considering David's personal history was his most famous victory. Others speculated it might refer to the death of Nabal, or even, the tragic later death of David's own son, Absalom.
Scholars really love to tie an obscure phrase to a dramatic narrative event, don't they?
They do, but the consensus Henry leans toward is much more practical. The suggestion is that it just signifies a specific tune, or perhaps a distinct musical instrument that was common at the time.
So it's not a secret code at all?
No, probably not. Contextually, the entire psalm points to David triumphing over the Philistines and the other neighboring nations that opposed his early settlement on the throne. You can read about that in 2 Samuel chapter 5.
Got it. So the title is essentially just sheet music direction for a victory song.
Precisely.
That makes the text feel much more grounded to me. I like to think of Muth-labben like a modern musician writing on their set list, play with a heavy distortion pedal.
Or use the drop D tuning.
Yeah, totally. The technical direction is completely lost to time. We don't have the specific instrument. We don't know the chord progression. We don't have the melody.
Those mechanical instructions faded away centuries ago.
But the resulting song, the lyrics, the theology, that all remains entirely intact for us to read today. The shell of the music is gone, but the substance of the praise is preserved.
That is a great way to put it. And the substance of those first two verses establishes the strict conditions for acceptable praise.
Wait, there are strict conditions?
According to the commentary, yes. It breaks down very specific criteria for how a believer is supposed to approach God with gratitude.
Okay, let's hear them.
First, it requires suitable returns. When marvelous works are done on your behalf, a casual acknowledgement is just insufficient.
So if a massive deliverance happens, just muttering thanks doesn't cut it.
Right? Second, the praise has to feature absolute sincerity. It has to originate with the heart, not just the lips. It has to be lively and fervent.
Lively and fervent. Okay.
And third, and I find this one quite fascinating, the argument is that when we give thanks for one particular mercy, we have to use that as an occasion to recollect former mercies.
Oh, wow. So we are instructed to build a context of gratitude.
Yes, you don't view a single blessing in isolation. You view it as the latest addition to a long historical catalog of grace.
Okay, I am tracking with the concept of a catalog of grace, but this brings up a massive practical dilemma for me.
What's that?
The text talks about how holy joy is the lifeblood of thankful praise. How does someone force holy joy if they just aren't feeling it?
That is a very fair question.
Because you can't just flip a switch in your brain and instantly generate fervent sincerity. Think about a normal person listening to this deep dive right now. They might acknowledge that a good thing happened, maybe a bill was unexpectedly paid, or a medical test came back clear, but their emotional state is entirely flat.
Right, they might just be exhausted.
Exactly. They're stressed about 5 other things. So if the criteria for acceptable praise requires lively sincerity, how do we manufacture that from a place of emotional exhaustion?
That is a very real human dilemma. But the commentary anticipates this difficulty. It clarifies the nature and the target of the joy.
Okay, how does it do that?
A sharp distinction is drawn here. The argument is that whatever earthly occurrence makes us glad, a promotion, a financial rescue, a restored relationship, our joy must pass through that earthly blessing and terminate in God only.
Pass through the blessing.
Yes, we are commanded to rejoice in the giver, not just the gift. If your joy gets stuck on the gift itself, it is essentially a form of idolatry.
Wow, so if I'm just pumped about the money, I'm missing the point.
You are worshiping the created thing. You're treating God like a cosmic vending machine, rejoicing in the candy bar rather than the sovereign designer of the universe.
That is heavy, but it makes sense.
When you train your mind to look through the glass of the blessing, to see the holy God who orchestrated it, the joy becomes holy. You aren't generating an emotion from a vacuum.
You are responding logically to the character of the one who provided the deliverance.
Yes.
So you move the spotlight off the shiny object you just received and shine it directly onto the character of the giver. That changes the entire posture of gratitude.
It really does. And once David finishes setting his heart to that specific type of praise, he immediately points to the reason for his joy.
Right. He is celebrating the complete routing of his enemies. But as we discussed at the beginning of the show, the method of their defeat is highly unusual.
It is not a standard battlefield victory with drawn swords and brilliant flanking maneuvers.
No, verse 3 gives us this fascinating tactical observation. The enemies are forced to turn back, and their very retreat becomes their ruin.
They do not save themselves by fleeing any more than they would by fighting.
Which is just wild. The text indicates a total collapse of their policy and their courage.
They retire with precipitation, meaning they flee in absolute panic. The commentary uses a very precise analogy from the Old Testament to illustrate this concept.
Oh, what analogy is that?
The story of Haman falling before Mordecai in the book of Esther.
Ah, yes.
The dynamic there is that once the fall begins, the person is completely lost.
Yeah.
There is no recovery. Haman's initial stumble, being forced to honor the man he despised, was the absolute guarantee of his total ruin.
So the momentum of divine justice, once unleashed, carries the enemy to their own destruction.
Yes. Their attempt to escape, their scrambling to save face or preserve their position is the very mechanism that finalizes their doom.
Which points to the core mechanism at play here. God does not need standard military instruments. He doesn't need drawn-out sieges or complex geopolitical alliances to defeat enemies.
His sheer presence is enough to end the contest.
Just his presence.
The commentary states that what a human might attempt to do with vast armies and complex strategies, God accomplishes with his mere presence. The glory of his might is sufficient for the destruction of the enemies of his people.
Is there another biblical example of that?
A New Testament connection is brought in to validate this reading. We look at the Garden of Gethsemane in John chapter 18.
Oh, when they come to arrest Jesus?
Yes. When the armed guards come, they ask for Jesus of Nazareth. Jesus replies with 2 words, I am he. And the text says the guards drew back and fell to the ground.
The sheer kinetic force of his presence physically knocked a detachment of trained, hardened soldiers backward into the dirt.
And the notation here is that Jesus could have just as easily made them perish in that moment. He could have spoken them out of existence entirely.
But he chose to just offer a brief, contained glimpse of his authority.
Right. When the enemies of the church are put to confusion, we must ascribe that defeat to the might of his presence, not to human instruments or earthly coincidences.
Think about a structural collapse at a massive skyscraper. You do not always need a wrecking ball or a team of demolition experts with explosives to bring down a building. If the foundation is fundamentally flawed and the internal supports are compromised by rust or pro-engineering, the building is already doomed.
It's just a matter of time.
Exactly. When it is suddenly exposed to a greater external force, like a shift in the earth or a massive gust of wind, the gravity of the building's own mass brings it down.
The weight of the structure itself becomes the instrument of its destruction.
Yes. The presence of the wind just exposes the unseen weakness, and the commentary shows how God initiates this kind of structural exposure and judgment in very specific phases.
Looking at verses 4 and 5, there is a clear, terrifying progression.
Let's unpack that. What's the progression?
A distinct three-step progression outlines how God deals with wicked nations and proud people. It is a terrifyingly orderly process.
Step 1.
Step 1 is that they are checked. God rebukes them, giving them real, tangible proofs of his displeasure.
Like a roadblock.
Yes. And this is crucial because it shows that the initial hardship is intended as a warning to prevent their total destruction. It is a mercy disguised as a roadblock.
Okay, what's step 2?
Step 2 is that they are cut off. If they ignore the check, they are destroyed and made monuments of vindictive justice.
Monuments of justice, meaning they become historical markers of what happens when divine warnings are arrogantly ignored.
Precisely. And step 3 is that they are buried. They are erased into perpetual infamy, their name put out forever.
So they are not even remembered with any respect. They are completely obliterated from honorable memory.
That's right.
You know, think about how often you and I ignore the warning checks of providence in our own lives.
Oh, all the time.
We experience a sudden roadblock, maybe a massive failure in a project we were pursuing, or a sharp rebuke from a friend, or just a bad circumstance. Our immediate human instinct is to complain about the friction.
We get angry. We try to bulldoze through the obstacle.
Yeah, we rarely stop to ask if that friction is actually step 1 of this progression. We rarely pause to consider, is this a check designed to stop me from reaching step 2 where I am cut off?
We treat rebukes as annoyances instead of life-saving interventions.
We assume the universe is just inconveniencing us rather than a holy God providing a merciful roadblock.
That is a very accurate reading of human nature. We misinterpret the mercy of a warning as an unjust hardship.
And if a person or a nation persists in that misinterpretation, they move from being warned to being buried in oblivion.
Building on that idea of cities and enemies being erased from memory, verse 6 visualizes these ruins.
It describes great and populous cities reduced to rubble so completely that their exact locations are lost to history. People search for them, archaeologists dig for them, and they cannot even find the foundations.
It is a picture of total desolation, human ambition reduced to dust.
But then David shifts the focus. When the dust of these ruined human empires settles, he points to what remains standing.
That earthly decay is contrasted with the eternal reality of God. While human cities become lost beneath the dirt, God sits upon the floods. He is unshaken and undisturbed.
The text emphasizes that God has prepared his throne, fixing it by his infinite wisdom and his immutable counsel.
And this contrast is the primary comfort for believers living in melancholy times. When the posture of the world looks dark, perplexed, and chaotic, the believer looks at the rubble of human ambition and then looks at the fixed throne of God.
Because God rules the world right now, and he will judge it with perfect equity. He is determining the lot of all people.
There is no chaos in heaven. The rise and fall of nations does not cause the throne of God to vibrate.
I love that phrasing, the throne doesn't vibrate. That brings us to verses 9 and 10, and a phrase that demands really close attention.
Okay.
David writes, "Those that know thy name will put their trust in thee." Now, I have to pause here, because practically speaking, knowing a name does not automatically generate trust.
How do you mean?
I know the names of thousands of people. I know the names of politicians, celebrities, casual acquaintances. I would not trust most of them to hold my wallet, let alone borrow my car keys.
That's a fair point.
Just possessing the data of a name does not equal confidence. So what does David mean when he connects knowing a name to absolute trust?
Well, the biblical concept of knowing the name is entirely different from memorizing a sequence of letters. In this context, knowing the name means having an intimate, experiential knowledge of God's attributes.
So it's about knowing his character.
Exactly. The commentary breaks this down into specific logical equations, showing how knowing a particular attribute directly translates into a specific type of trust.
Oh, I like equations.
It is a calculated reliance based on flawless data.
So if I'm tracking this, it means we have to break down the specific attributes to understand how the trust operates. Let's walk through those equations.
All right. The first equation is that knowing his infinite wisdom means you will trust him further than you can see him. The citation here is Job chapter 35.
Trusting further than you can see him?
Yes. When you cannot understand the current circumstances, when the path forward is obscured and your own intellect is baffled, your knowledge of his wisdom allows you to trust his plan anyway.
You are relying on a mind infinitely greater than your own.
Exactly. The second equation states that knowing his almighty might means trusting him when all creature confidences fail.
Creature confidence is like relying on created things.
Right. When your bank account empties, your health deteriorates, or your human allies collapse under pressure, you trust the strength of God because you know it is inexhaustible.
You are no longer leaning on fragile reeds.
The third equation is perhaps the heaviest. Knowing his infinite grace means trusting him even though he slays you. That's referencing Job 13:15.
Oh, wow. That requires a massive psychological shift. Trusting someone while they are actively blessing you is easy.
Right.
But trusting someone's goodness, even when their providence brings intense suffering, when the sovereign plan involves your own pain, that requires a knowledge of grace that goes far beyond superficial religious platitudes.
And the equations continue to build on that intensity. The fourth equation is that knowing his inviolable truth means rejoicing in deferred promises.
Deferred promises, like waiting for years.
Yes, when God promises something and the fulfillment seems delayed for decades, your knowledge that he cannot lie allows you to rest upon his word without anxiety.
You don't panic because the clock is ticking. You rest because the character of the promiser is flawless.
Finally, the fifth equation states that knowing him as the Father of spirits means trusting him with your soul. You trust him with your main care, your eternal state at all times, even to the very end of your life.
Those 5 equations change everything about how we understand faith. It turns trust from a blind leap in the dark into a highly calculated decision based on rock-solid data about who God is.
And because trusting God means trusting his justice, we have to look at a chilling but necessary part of this analysis.
Yeah, we have to look at how God accounts for the injustices that human courts miss. Verses 11 and 12 set the stage for this accounting.
A dual residence of God is mentioned in these verses. His glory dwells in heaven, but the special residence of his grace is in Zion, which represents the church.
So there is a specific geographic and spiritual location where he meets his people with promises.
Yes, and from that location, David calls for the neighboring nations to stop singing praises to false gods and recognize the true God of Israel.
And the reason they need to recognize him is terrifying. The text talks about God making inquisition for blood. What does the commentary reveal about this specific accounting process?
The exposition on this phrase is deeply sobering. The explanation is that before the final judgment day, God makes an inquisition on earth.
Meaning he investigates.
He remembers every single drop of innocent blood that has been shed. Whether it was done openly on a battlefield or secretly in a dark alley, nothing escapes his notice.
The ledger of heaven is perfectly balanced.
A very stark phrase is used here. The text suggests God will return this violence sevenfold upon the head of the bloodthirsty. He will give them blood to drink because they are worthy of it.
Human justice systems are fundamentally flawed. They miss clues. They have corrupt judges, they run out of funding, they are bound by statutes of limitations.
But divine justice is meticulous. Both the cry of the shed blood and the cry of the humble prayers of the oppressed are sealed up among God's treasures.
They are kept safe until the appointed time of reckoning.
Yes.
That is a terrifying thought for the wicked, but a profound, a staggering comfort for the oppressed.
Very much so.
Knowing that not one drop of innocent blood is forgotten, that not one act of secret malice is overlooked, changes how you view the injustices of history. You realize that the corrupt individuals who seem to escape earthly justice are simply accumulating a heavier debt in an inescapable ledger.
But then the song takes a very sharp turn inward. After talking about this cosmic, terrifying justice, David shifts to a very personal prayer for compassion in verses 13 and 14.
Let's talk about that shift. What happens?
This shift provides a masterclass in theology. David approaches the judge of the universe, the one making inquisition for blood, and he does not bring a resume.
A resume. That's a great way to put it.
A distinct point is highlighted here. David approaches God with misery only and no merit.
Misery, no merit.
He depends solely on mercy for his relief. He even submits the specific mechanics of his deliverance to God's wisdom, essentially saying, "Do for me as thou thinkest fit."
He is not prescribing the solution. He is not demanding a specific outcome based on his own perceived righteousness.
No, he is just presenting his desperate condition.
It is the exact opposite of how human beings usually operate. Usually, when we ask someone for a massive favor, we list the reasons why we deserve it. We point out our loyalty, our hard work, our good intentions.
And a spotless record.
Yeah, we bring our merit. But David brings his misery. Think about going to a doctor with a severe, life-threatening illness.
Okay.
You do not walk into the examination room and hand the doctor a list of your athletic achievements, your academic degrees, or your financial portfolio.
That would be ridiculous.
Right. You do not try to impress the doctor with your status. You bring your symptoms. You present your misery, your pain, your brokenness.
And you rely completely on the physician's expertise and mercy to cure you.
You submit to their treatment plan. To bring an academic resume to an oncologist is absurd. To bring human merit to a holy God is equally absurd.
That analogy captures the theological point flawlessly. To bring your merit to God is to fundamentally misunderstand both his absolute holiness and your own total depravity.
You have to know where you stand.
Recognizing your lack of merit, acknowledging that you bring nothing but symptoms to the great physician, is the only posture that allows you to receive true mercy. And David's reliance on God's wisdom in this posture pays off immediately in the text.
It does pay off, because the next section reveals how God handles the wicked without David having to lift a single finger.
Verses 15 and 16 outline the actual mechanics of the judgment we discussed earlier.
The wicked sink into the pit they dug. They are caught in the exact net they laid for someone else.
The self-defeating nature of sin is expanded upon with real-world examples that were as true in antiquity as they are today.
What kind of examples?
The observation is made regarding how drunkards kill themselves through their own excess. Prodigals beggar themselves by spending their wealth recklessly.
And the contentious and angry people bring mischief upon themselves by alienating everyone around them and provoking unnecessary conflicts.
The core insight here is that the destruction of sinners is not just merited by them, meaning they deserve it, but it is efficiently caused by them.
The sin is the very engine of their destruction.
Yes. The malice they weaponize against others becomes the mechanism of their own execution.
It is a boomerang effect. You throw the sin out into the world, intending to harm someone else, intending to gain an unjust advantage, and it circles back and strikes you in the back of the head.
The trap you meticulously set for your rival is the exact snare that catches your own foot.
And right in the middle of this description of self-destruction, David inserts a specific musical term, higeon.
Yes, higeon. This is identified as a note commanding special regard. It is an instruction to pause the music entirely.
Why pause?
It tells the congregation to meditate seriously on the fact that God makes himself known by the judgments he executes. It is not a moment to rush past to get to the chorus.
It is a moment to stop and observe the terrifying symmetry of divine justice.
And from that necessary pause, verse 17 moves to the most sobering reality of all the eternal consequences. The text states, "The wicked shall be turned into hell, into Sheol, a pit of destruction."
But I have a major question about the criteria for this judgment. The verse says this happens to all the nations that forget God. Is mere forgetfulness really the standard for such severe eternal punishment? I mean, we forget things all the time. We forget names, we forget appointments, we forget where we put our keys.
Sure.
It seems like a very passive, harmless crime to warrant such an active and terrifying punishment.
It sounds passive to a modern audience, but the immense weight of this forgetfulness is clarified in the commentary. According to the analysis, forgetfulness of God is not a momentary lapse in memory.
What is it then?
It is the absolute root cause of all wickedness. It is a willful, deliberate ignoring of the Creator. It is a structural rebellion.
A structural rebellion.
It is living as if he does not exist, disregarding his laws, and refusing to acknowledge his sovereignty over your life. Multitudes live this way by choice.
The text points out that there are entire nations that operate on this principle of deliberate amnesia.
But a chilling caveat is added. Their vast numbers provide zero security. Being part of a massive majority that forgets God will not insulate you from divine justice.
They will be led to ruin like sheep to a slaughterhouse, regardless of how many millions of them agree on the same rebellion.
It reframes the idea entirely, doesn't it?
It really does. It isn't, oops, I forgot. It is building your entire life, your entire business, your entire civilization on the premise that God is irrelevant. You are actively deleting him from the equation of reality.
And if that judgment is certain, it leads to a very natural tension that David addresses next.
Yeah, if God is going to judge the wicked, why does it feel like evil goes unchecked for so long? Why do corrupt politicians, abusive leaders, and deceitful individuals seem to get away with it for decades?
The final verses of this text deal directly with the anxiety of waiting for justice. Verse 18 provides the anchor for the waiting believer.
It acknowledges the feeling of being needy and seemingly forgotten by God. The delay of justice is a heavy burden.
But a staggering reassurance is brought in here. The statement is made that the believer does not make haste. Faith does not panic.
Faith does not panic. I like that.
The vision of justice is for an appointed time, determined by divine wisdom. The imagery of a mother and her child is utilized. Even if it were possible for a mother to forget her nursing child, which goes against every natural instinct, God will not forget his elect.
So the delay is not denial.
No. He will eventually make it visible to the entire universe that he never forgot his people for a single second. The timing is determined by his immutable counsel, not by our anxious clock watching.
Which brings us to David's final plea in verses 19 and 20. He has praised God, he has meditated on the terrifying symmetry of justice, he has acknowledged his own misery and total lack of merit, and now he makes a direct request.
What's the request?
Arise, O Lord, let not man prevail. He asks God to strike terror to reveal the true nature of humanity.
3 very specific requests are unpacked within that final plea. First, David asks God to restrain the enemies. He's pointing out the sheer absurdity of mortal man attempting to prevail against the immortal God.
He is asking God to set hard boundaries on their malice.
Second, he asks God to reckon with them. This is a call for ultimate accountability. The notation here is that when the day of grace is over, the infinite mercy of God will not relent toward the impenitent.
There's a deadline to mercy.
Third, he asks God to frighten them. He wants God to strike terror into their hearts so they realize they are but men.
That last point is fascinating. He doesn't ask God to vaporize them in that specific line. He asks God to terrify them with the truth of their own frailty. He asks God to point out their expiration date.
The distinct theological comfort found in this request is carefully laid out. It is highly desirable for the peace of the entire universe that men realize they are mutable, mortal, accountable, and entirely dependent creatures.
Because when humans forget they are fragile creatures, they act like tyrants.
They try to play God. They oppress the weak because they think they are invincible.
It is an act of mercy to the rest of the world when God forcefully reminds a tyrant that he is just a man who will one day stand before a holy judge and give an account for every drop of blood.
We have covered massive territory today.
We really have. We started with the mystery of Muthlabben and the anatomy of true praise, learning that joy must pass through the gift to terminate in the giver.
We looked at the sheer kinetic force of God's presence, capable of defeating enemies by making their panicked retreat their ruin.
We analyzed the boomerang effect of sin, seeing how wickedness is its own efficient executioner, and we grounded it all in the comfort of trusting a God whose counsel is immutable and whose throne is unshakable.
To you listening right now, I want you to evaluate your own posture.
When you approach God, are you leaning on your creature confidences? Are you bringing an academic resume, a list of your perceived merits and your good intentions? Or are you bringing your misery and relying solely on his mercy?
Are you worshiping the candy bar or the sovereign designer?
I want to leave you with a final thought to mull over. If the commentary is right and sin is truly its own most efficient executioner, how does that change the way you view the current successes of corrupt systems in the world today?
When you see arrogance and injustice thriving, when you see wicked individuals accumulating wealth and influence.
Are you watching them build an invincible empire, or are you just watching them dig a very elaborate, very deep pit? Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the source material.